After 13 days away on a business trip, I landed just before my son's 40th birthday, carrying a vintage watch and an expensive bottle of scotch to surprise him. 20 minutes into the Uber ride home, the driver passed my exit. "You missed the turn," I snapped. Without slowing down, he replied, "I know." I grabbed the door handle. Locked. "Stop this car now." He looked at me in the mirror and quietly said, "If I take you home tonight, you won't walk out of that house alive." Before we go any further, I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country, let me know. This community means everything to me. A quick note: this story contains some fictional elements woven in for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to actual names or places is entirely coincidental, but the lesson it carries, that part is yours to keep. I have lived 68 years on this earth, and I have learned one thing above everything else: the moments that change your life never bother to announce themselves. They slip in through the side door, wearing ordinary clothes, looking like nothing at all, right up until the second they are not. It was a Friday evening in early October, the kind of Houston afternoon where the rain comes down sideways and the whole city smells like wet concrete and motor oil. I had just walked out of Terminal C at George Bush Intercontinental, rolling suitcase in one hand, a shopping bag in the other. 13 days in Chicago for a commercial real estate summit, the longest stretch I had been away from Houston in nearly a decade. My back ached. My eyes felt like sandpaper, and every single cell in my body was pointing south toward home. But there was something else in my chest that night, something lighter than fatigue. A quiet excitement I had not felt in years. Inside that shopping bag were two things I had spent the better part of the week tracking down. The first was a vintage Patek Philippe pocket watch, the exact model my son Ethan had pointed to in a magazine 3 years ago, laughing and saying, "Dad, can you imagine owning something like that?" The second was a bottle of Macallan 25-year Scotch, so old it had been aging in the barrel since before Ethan learned to walk. His 40th birthday was tonight. I had changed my flight at the counter in Chicago that morning, moved it up 4 hours without telling a soul. I wanted to see his face when I walked through that door. I wanted to be the surprise. I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app while the rain drummed against the terminal overhang. A driver accepted the ride in under 90 seconds. Name Derek Shaw, black Chevy Suburban. The car was already at the curb by the time I reached it, engine running, wipers going at full speed. "Long trip?" the driver asked as I settled into the back seat. His voice was calm, even. The kind of calm that comes not from ease but from discipline. 13 days, I said, buckling up and setting the shopping bag carefully beside me. "Ready to be done with it." He said nothing else. No small talk, no radio, no piped-in playlist. Just the sound of rain and tires and the low hum of the engine as we pulled onto the freeway. I did not think anything of it. Some drivers talk your ear off. Some don't say a word. After 13 days of conference rooms and cocktail receptions, I was grateful for the quiet. I watched Houston pass by the window, the skyline gray and glittering, behind a curtain of rain. The exit signs lit up pale green in the early dark. I checked my phone, scrolled through emails I had been putting off, thought about what to say when Ethan opened the door. Maybe I would just hold up the shopping bag and let the Patek speak for itself. We had been driving for about 20 minutes when I looked up from my phone and noticed something was wrong. The exit for Westheimer Road had just gone by without us slowing down. I frowned and leaned forward. "Hey, you missed my turn back there." The driver's hands stayed relaxed on the wheel. He did not glance at the GPS. He did not tap the brake. He just kept driving smooth and steady like I had said nothing at all. "Hey!" I knocked on the back of the headrest. "I said you missed it." Westheimer. That was my exit. He looked up at me in the rearview mirror then. His eyes were dark, completely unreadable. I know, he said. 2 words. No apology, no explanation, no offer to turn around. A cold wire of alarm ran straight through me. I reached for the door handle and pulled. Nothing. Child lock or central locking the door held firm. I checked the window controls. Unresponsive. I lifted my phone to call 911 and stared at the screen. No signal. Not one bar. The Uber app was open but frozen, the little car icon spinning on the map like it had lost its mind. Unlock this door right now. My voice came out harder than I intended, but I did not soften it. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to pull over, now. I can't do that, he said. Quiet. Firm. Like a man who had already made peace with whatever came next. The hell you can't! I leaned forward until my face was close to the gap between the front seats. 68 years old, and I had not spent 4 decades building a company by backing down when someone told me no. Pull this car over, or I promise you, you will regret it. He exhaled through his nose a slow, measured breath, the kind a person takes when they are carrying something very heavy and trying not to drop it. Mr. Cole, he said, I am not going to hurt you. That stopped me cold. Not the words themselves, but the way he said my name, not reading it off the app, not guessing. Saying it the way someone says a name they have known for a while. How do you know my name? I demanded. He did not answer that. Instead, he changed lanes, moving us away from the main flow of traffic, and said, I need you to stay in this car for a few more minutes. That is all I am asking. That is not all you are asking. I sat back, heart-hammering, and reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. My fingers closed around the barrel of a tactical pen, solid steel, heavy enough to matter, that I carried on every long business trip. I kept it low out of the line of the mirror. You are holding me against my will in a locked vehicle. That is kidnapping. That is a federal offense. And I will make sure you understand exactly what that means the moment this car stops. You're right, he said. Everything you just said is correct. And I'm still not stopping yet. The freeway thinned. Streetlights grew sparse. The familiar exits, the ones I had driven past 1,000 times on my way home, fell away one by one behind us. We were heading west and south, away from my neighborhood, away from the city center, toward a part of Houston I recognized only by its silhouette of old warehouses and chain-link fences. Where are you taking me? My voice was flat now. The anger had not gone anywhere. It had just moved deeper, gotten quieter, the way it does when you realize that shouting is not going to solve the problem. He looked at me in the mirror one more time, and for just a moment, something crossed his face, not cruelty, not calculation, but something that looked almost like pain. Somewhere you need to be, he said, before you go home. Why? I pressed. Give me one reason, one. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. The rain picked up, hammering the roof of the Suburban like it was trying to get our attention. Because if I take you home right now, Mr. Cole, he finally said, each word landing with the weight of something he had rehearsed, and still did not want to say, you will not walk out of that house again. The shopping bag sat beside me on the seat. The Patek Philippe. The Macallan 25-year. The birthday surprise I had flown back 4 hours early to deliver. And outside the window, the city I had lived in for 40 years grew darker and less familiar with every passing mile. The car turned onto a road I had never seen before. And I realized with the kind of certainty that settles in your gut before your mind catches up that tonight was not going to go the way I had planned. For a long moment, the only sounds in that car were the rain on the roof and the rhythm of the wipers cutting back and forth across the windshield. My mind was running fast, faster than it had in years, turning over every possible explanation, every rational exit from the situation I had somehow found myself in. I was a 68-year-old man locked in the back seat of a stranger's SUV heading deeper into a part of Houston I did not recognize, with a shopping bag full of birthday gifts sitting next to me like a cruel joke. Rational. Stay rational. That was the only tool I had left. You said I won't walk out of my house again. I kept my voice level the way I used to keep it in boardrooms, when the other side thought they had me cornered. That is a very specific thing to say. So I am going to give you exactly one chance to explain what you mean before I do something we will both regret. He drove for another few seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Your house is not safe tonight, Mr. Cole. That is not a threat. That is the reason I picked you up." "You're a rideshare driver," I said. "You don't pick people up for reasons. You pick up fares. Tonight I'm not a rideshare driver." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. "Then what are you?" He glanced up at the mirror. "Someone who owes you more than you know." That answer made no sense, and the fact that it made no sense made everything worse. A man who wants to rob you or hurt you does not talk about debts. He does not look at you in the rear view with something that resembles guilt. I did not know what to do with that, so I leaned forward and tried a different angle. "You know my name," I said. "You know I missed my stop. You apparently know things about my house, so tell me how do you know any of this?" He was quiet again, measured. Like every word he gave me was being rationed. "I know you flew in from Chicago tonight," he said. "I know you were supposed to land at 9:15, but you changed your ticket this morning at the United counter in O'Hare. I know you did not tell anyone you were coming back early. And I know what is inside that shopping bag on the seat beside you." My hand moved instinctively to the bag. I could not help it. The Patek, the Macallan. I had not mentioned either of those things to a single person since leaving Chicago. "A watch," he said, "and a bottle of scotch, for your son's birthday." The skin on the back of my neck went cold. "Who are you?" My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated that it did. "I am not asking again who are you and who sent you." His hands shifted on the wheel. For the first time since I had gotten into this car, his composure showed a hairline fracture barely visible there and gone in less than a second. But I saw it. 40 years of reading people across negotiating tables had taught me to catch things like that. "3 days ago," he said, "I received a text message. It came from a number I did not have saved, but I recognized it the moment I read it. The person who sent it told me there were going to be people at your house tonight who were not there for a birthday party. They told me you could not walk through that front door. They asked me to intercept you." My throat felt like it was closing. "Intercept me," I repeated. "You mean kidnap me. I mean keep you alive." His voice did not rise, did not shake. "Those are different things, Mr. Cole. They feel remarkably similar from where I'm sitting." I gripped the tactical pen in my jacket pocket. "If this car stopped, really stopped, not a red light, but a full stop, I was going to move. Fast. I had not built a company from the ground up by waiting for someone else to open the exit for me. The moment this car slows down enough, I want you to understand something. I will not sit here quietly." "I know," he said. "I'd think less of you if you would." That caught me off guard. I had expected pushback, a warning, maybe a threat. Not something that sounded impossibly like respect. "Then why won't you stop?" I demanded. "Because the people who are watching your house are also watching the routes leading to it. If I pull over anywhere near your neighborhood and you get out, they will see you before we have a chance to get you somewhere safe. I need 7 more minutes. That is all." 7 minutes. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You want me to trust a man who locked me in a car and drove me past my exit, and you are asking for 7 minutes on top of that?" "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said. "I'm asking you to not get yourself killed before you understand what is happening." Outside, the rain intensified. The last of the highway lights disappeared behind us. We were in the industrial outskirts now, wide, flat streets lined with chain-link fences and loading docks and warehouses that had seen better decades. The kind of place where sound gets swallowed up and nobody notices what comes and goes. Every true crime instinct I had ever laughed at my colleagues for believing in was screaming at full volume inside my skull. And yet the man in the front seat had just described my ticket change. He had named the gifts I bought for my son. He had known my name before I said a word. "The text message," I said finally. "Who sent it?" He turned onto a gravel access road. The Suburban slowed tires crunching headlights cutting through the dark and rain until they found the rusted metal wall of a warehouse ahead. "Someone who loves you," he said. He brought the car to a stop and cut the engine. The silence that followed was enormous. Someone who found out what was being planned and had no other way to stop it. "Who?" My voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Give me a name." He turned in his seat for the first time and looked directly at me, not through the mirror, but face to face, the way a man looks at another man when he is about to say something he knows will land like a blow. "Sophie," he said. "Your granddaughter, the shopping bag, the birthday watch, the scotch I had been so proud of finding. My granddaughter, 16 years old, barely 5'3". The kid who still called me every Sunday night just to talk had sent a stranger to pull me out of an Uber on a rainy Friday in October. My hands, I noticed, had finally stopped feeling steady. That name hit me the way a sudden brake does, all forward momentum gone. In an instant, body jerked against the seatbelt, everything suspended in a single shocked second. My granddaughter, 16 years old, barely taller than the kitchen counter she used to stand on tiptoe to reach when she was small, sneaking cookies before dinner, while I pretended not to notice. "Sophie," I said again, and my voice came out scraped raw. "My Sophie sent you." Derek turned fully in his seat to face me. No mirror now, just two men in a dark car in the rain. "Yes," he said. My chest felt like something inside it had been knocked loose. I had about 100 questions firing at once, and the one that came out first surprised even me. "Is she safe right now? Is she safe?" "She's with someone I trust," he said. "She's been safe since yesterday. It took me 2 days to verify her story, confirm your identity, and set up a location Diana couldn't trace before I moved her. I wasn't going to pull that girl out of the house and into something worse." The relief that moved through me was physical, a loosening in my shoulders I had not realized I was carrying. But it lasted about 4 seconds before the questions crowded back in, louder and sharper than before. "How does a 16-year-old girl find you?" I pressed. "She doesn't know you. She has never met you." Derek reached into the center console and set something on the armrest between us. A business card. Old, the edges soft from age, the print slightly faded. I picked it up and held it toward the window where the ambient light from outside was just enough to read. Derek Shaw, Private Investigative Services. A Houston phone number and a small logo in the corner, a compass rose simple and clean. I knew that card. I had held one just like it 15 years ago, sitting across a conference table from a man who had just helped me unravel a land fraud case that would have cost my company $3 million and cost Derek Shaw everything else. "She found this in my desk," I said. It was not a question. "In the bottom drawer," Derek confirmed. "She texted that number 3 days ago, Thursday morning." I thought about my home office, the big mahogany desk that had come with us from our first house, the one Margaret had insisted we keep when we moved. Bottom drawer, left side behind the hanging files. I had not opened that drawer in years. "She told me there had been phone calls." Derek continued, his voice steady but careful, choosing each word the way a surgeon chooses instruments. "Private calls her mother had been making from the study after Ethan left for work. Sophie said she overheard one of them 3 days ago and could not shake what she heard." My throat tightened. What did she hear? Enough to know that the people coming to your house tonight were not coming for a birthday party. He paused. She said she needed someone to stop you from walking through that front door. She said she couldn't call the police. Why not? The words came out sharper than I intended, fear sharpening them into something that sounded like accusation. If she heard something serious, why wouldn't she? Because she's 16, Derek said, and his voice took on a quiet weight that cut right through my objection. And her mother is her legal guardian. If she calls 911 with no physical evidence, just, "I heard a phone call," the police show up, Diana gets wind of it immediately, and Sophie is alone in that house with a woman who clearly has no problem putting detailed plans into motion. She made the right call, Mr. Cole. She protected herself the only way she could. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. The only way she could. My granddaughter alone in that house, carrying something that must have felt like a 1,000-pound weight on her 16-year-old shoulders, going through desk drawers looking for the name of a man she had never met because she had no one else to turn to. My eyes burned. I was not going to cry in the back seat of a stranger's car. I absolutely refused. But my chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "The phone," I said, pulling myself back. "Why can't I make a call? What did you do to the signal?" Derek did not flinch. "A signal jammer," he said. "Small device about the size of a TV remote. It emits radio frequency interference that disrupts cellular and data signals within roughly a 30-foot radius. I used it to keep you in the car long enough to hear me out." He held my gaze steadily. "I'm sorry for the method," he said, and there was no deflection in it, no hedging. "I stand by the reason. I wanted to be furious. I had every right to be. And I was somewhere underneath the fear and the ache and the image of Sophie rifling through my desk drawer. I absolutely was. But fury requires a kind of single-mindedness I could not sustain right then, not with my granddaughter's name still ringing in my ears like a struck bell. "You said she's with someone you trust," I said. "Where are we going?" Derek reached forward and restarted the engine. We had been sitting still for less than 2 minutes, but the cold had already begun to work its way into the car. 3 blocks, he said. "There's a warehouse. We have someone waiting who can show you what Sophie heard, what's been collected over the last 72 hours, and what is currently happening inside your house right now." "Right now," I repeated. "Live feed," he said, "from a camera system you installed yourself." He pulled the Suburban back onto the gravel path, headlights sweeping across a chain-link fence and a row of dead oak trees bent sideways by years of Gulf wind. My fingers found the business card again, without me thinking about it, and I held onto it, that soft, faded rectangle of cardstock, the way a man holds onto the one familiar thing left in an unfamiliar world. 3 blocks, 72 hours, a live feed from my own house. Somewhere in that warehouse, my granddaughter was waiting. I had never wanted to be somewhere faster in my life, and I had never been more terrified of what I was about to find out. The warehouse looked exactly as Derek had described, unremarkable, forgotten, the kind of building a city accumulates without intending to keep. A dark sedan sat close to the wall with its lights off. No signage, no indication that anything of consequence was happening inside. Derek cut the engine. "I need to tell you something before we go in," he said. I had my hand on the door handle already. "Make it fast." The man inside, his name is Frank Morrow. He spent 22 years as a special agent with the FBI's Houston field office. White-collar crime, financial fraud, asset protection. He retired 4 years ago, but he still has relationships with agents who are active, and he still has access to databases and court contacts that most private citizens never get near. Derek turned to face me fully. He is not here in any official capacity tonight. But everything he has gathered in the last 3 days is real, it is documented, and it is the kind of material that will hold up in a federal courtroom. I need you to walk in there ready to listen. I wanted to argue with the instruction on principle alone, but I had been in enough high-stakes rooms to know when someone was giving me information I actually needed versus when they were stalling. This was not stalling. Fine, I said. Let's go. The rain had softened to a thin mist by the time we crossed the gravel lot. Derek pushed the side door open, and I stepped through into a space that smelled of old concrete and machine oil, lit by a pair of portable work lights set on standing frames. Someone had arranged the center of the room into a rough working station, a folding table with 2 laptops, a portable printer, a power strip running to an extension cord, and 3 metal chairs. A man stood up from behind the table as I walked in. Frank Morrow was around 55, built broad through the shoulders with close-cut gray hair and the kind of face that had learned over a long career not to give much away. He extended his hand across the table. "Mr. Cole, Frank Morrow, I'm sorry for the circumstances." I shook it because refusing would have been childish. "You were FBI, I said. "I was," he said. "I'm independent now, which means I answer to no agency, and I have no badge, but it also means I can move faster than any field office would allow me to." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit down." I did not sit down. I looked past him, past the table, past the second laptop, and then I saw her. Sophie was sitting in the far corner of the warehouse on a folding chair, knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins. A heavy-set woman in a dark jacket sat 2 chairs away, one of Frank's people. I understood someone who had stayed with Sophie since the night before and had the quiet, watchful posture of a person paid to notice everything. The woman stood when I entered, gave me a single nod, and stepped back to give us space. Her dark hair was damp at the ends, like she had been caught in the rain at some point, and it had not fully dried. She was wearing a gray hoodie. I recognized the one from her high school cross-country team, the one she had been wearing the last time I saw her 6 weeks ago when I took her for barbecue on Westheimer. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and she came off that chair like a shot. "Grandpa." Her voice broke clean in half on the second syllable, and then she was crossing the warehouse floor at a near run, and I opened my arms, and she hit my chest hard enough to rock me back half a step. Her arms went around my ribs, and she held on with the grip of someone who had been holding their breath for 3 days straight and had finally been allowed to exhale. I felt her shoulders shake. Once. Twice. She was not crying loudly. She was the kind of kid who never cried loudly. But her whole body was trembling in that way that means the tears are coming, whether you invite them or not. And my throat closed up so hard I could not have spoken if I tried. I held the back of her head with one hand, the way I used to when she was small and frightened, and I said the only true thing I had available. "I've got you. I'm right here." She pulled back after a moment, dragging the sleeve of her hoodie across her eyes, jaw tight with the effort of composing herself. "I didn't know how else to do it," she said, her voice still unsteady at the edges. "I didn't know who to call. I found Mr. Shaw's card in your desk, and I just thought maybe he'd know what to do." "You did exactly right," I said. My own voice was not entirely steady either, and I had stopped pretending otherwise. "You hear me exactly right. Frank gave us 10 seconds, just 10, because 10 was all we had, and then he said quietly, but with the unmistakable finality of a man who had run enough operations to know when sentiment had to step aside, 'Mr. Cole, I need you to look at something.' I pressed my hand once against Sophie's cheek, and then straightened and moved to the table. Frank turned one of the laptops to face me. On the screen was a video file already paused. The timestamp in the corner read October 10th, 2025, 9:47 a.m. That morning, while I had still been in Chicago finishing the last panel of the summit. The footage was exterior shot from a camera mounted on the brick pillar at the entrance of my neighborhood, the kind of wide-angle community security camera managed by the Homeowners Association. In the frame, I could see the front of my property, the iron gate, the circular driveway, and a white cargo van pulled up to the curb. "Watch," Frank said. I watched. 3 men got out of the van. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of people who had been somewhere before and knew exactly where they were going. Each one carried a large plastic storage bin, the kind used for document transport, with locking lids and handled grips. The gate opened from the inside before they even had to knock. Someone had let them in. "Count the bins," Frank said. I counted 7. "Those are legal document containers," Frank said. "Standard issue for law offices transporting executed paperwork. Each one holds approximately 300 documents." He let that number settle before he continued. 7 bins brought into your home at 9:47 this morning. Your son left for work at 8:15. Your granddaughter was at school. He looked at me steadily. Your daughter-in-law was the only adult in that house. My jaw had locked itself shut at some point during the footage. I could feel the tension all the way up into my temples. "Who let them in, sir?" I asked. But even as the words came out, the cold certainty was already forming in my chest, like ice water finding its level, slow, inevitable filling every available space. Frank reached over and tapped the trackpad. The video continued 4 seconds further, just long enough for the camera to catch the front door swinging wide, and Diana stepping out onto the porch to wave them through. I have stared down a lot of difficult things in my life. I have sat across from bankers who wanted to foreclose on my first development project. I have watched a lawsuit nearly take everything I built in my 30s. I have stood at my wife Margaret's grave on a February morning and understood for the first time what the word permanent really meant. I know what it feels like when the ground shifts under you. But watching Diana step out onto the porch of my own home on that laptop screen, smiling, gesturing, waving 7 strangers with 7 bins of legal documents through my front gate, like she was hosting a catering crew, produced a sensation I had no previous category for. It was not quite rage, not quite grief. It was something colder and more total than either of those, the feeling of a man who has just understood that the architecture of his life contained a load-bearing wall he never knew existed, and someone had been quietly chipping away at it for years. "She let them in," I said. My voice came out flat as a road. "At 9:47 this morning," Frank confirmed. "While you were still in Chicago, while Ethan was at the office, while Sophie was in school." He closed the footage window and opened a new file. "I need to walk you through what those bins contain, or more precisely, what they're meant to contain by the end of tonight." He turned the laptop fully toward me and I leaned in. On the screen was a document. The header was clean professional, formatted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I read the title, and the room got very quiet around me. Durable power of attorney, full authority. Raymond Arthur Cole, grantor. Ethan James Cole, agent. This gives Ethan complete legal authority over your finances, your business holdings, your bank accounts, and your right to enter into contracts on behalf of Cole and partners, Frank said. In Texas, a durable power of attorney takes effect the moment it is signed and properly witnessed. It does not require a court order. It does not require a medical evaluation. It requires your signature, 2 witnesses, and a notary public, all of whom, I said slowly, are apparently already inside my house. 4 of your guests tonight are not guests, Frank said, and he slid a printed list across the table. I picked it up. 4 names each with a highlighted line beside it. Dr. Gerald Holt, licensed psychiatrist practicing in Houston for 18 years, received a wire transfer of $40,000 from a private account registered to Diana Cole 3 weeks ago. He pointed to the next name. Marcus Webb, attorney specializing in probate and estate law, received $25,000 from the same account 2 days later. He moved down the list. A notary public, and 2 individuals listed on the invitation as longtime friends of Ethan's. We believe they have been engaged as the required witnesses. I set the list down on the table because my hands had started to feel unreliable, and I did not want Frank to see them shake. Sophie had moved to a chair just off to my left, close enough that I could feel her presence, and I heard her draw a slow, careful breath. "Why the psychiatrist?" I asked. "If this is just a power of attorney, why do they need a psychiatrist at the table?" "Because the power of attorney is only the first step," Frank said. "Dr. Holt's role tonight is to observe you document your behavior and begin building a clinical record that Diana can take to probate court in the weeks following. Her long-term plan is a full conservatorship, a court-ordered guardianship that would give Ethan permanent legal control over your person and your estate. To succeed in probate court, she needs a paper trail showing cognitive decline. She needs a licensed physician on record saying he personally observed erratic, confused behavior. And the way she gets that behavior on record," I said, hearing my own voice from what felt like a great distance, "is by making sure I actually behave that way tonight." Frank reached into a folder and placed another document on the table. This one was a laboratory report, preliminary toxicology analysis, stamped with the name of a private forensic lab in Sugarland. I scanned the findings. A sedative compound, colorless, odorless, water-soluble, effective within 15 to 20 minutes of ingestion. Dosage noted significantly elevated. Effects: disorientation, memory impairment, loss of motor coordination, potential for agitation, and confused speech. This analysis was run on a sample taken from a bar preparation set in your kitchen, Frank said. The compound was found in a mixing vessel that had already been used, meaning a test dose had been prepared, not just acquired. He looked at me steadily. The sample was collected by your household manager, Walter Price. He removed it from the premises this morning before leaving. Walter Price, 25 years. The man had been in my house longer than Diana had been in my son's life, and he had walked out this morning carrying evidence that might be the difference between my freedom and a room in a private care facility. Walter took that sample, I said, and something cracked open in my chest that I did not have a name for. He knew. He suspected, Frank said carefully. He acted on that suspicion. The sample gives us physical corroboration that an attempt to drug you was not merely planned, but actively prepared. He paused. There is also a vehicle. White SUV registered to a private care facility called Meridian Care, located 40 minutes north of your neighborhood. It has been parked 2 blocks from your home since 4 o'clock this afternoon. We believe its purpose is transport to move you out of the house once the paperwork has been executed and you are no longer coherent enough to resist. Sophie made a sound beside me, not quite a word, more like the breath a person makes when something hits them somewhere they did not have their guard up. I reached over without looking and put my hand over hers on the armrest, and her fingers folded around mine and held on with a grip that was far too strong for a 16-year-old girl who was supposed to be worrying about homework and college applications. The bottle I brought home, I said. The Macallan 25-year sitting in its velvet presentation box inside the shopping bag in Derek's car. I was going to open it with Ethan tonight. Just the 2 of us. They have their own bottle prepared, Frank said. Or rather, their own glass. Only 1 glass was treated. Yours. I stood up from that table and walked 3 steps away because I needed to put distance between myself and the words that had just been spoken and the document that was still sitting there with my name printed on it in clean, professional type. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out and filled with gravel. I stared at the far wall of the warehouse, the rust-streaked corrugated metal, the dead light in the corner, and I breathed. Does my son know? I asked, still facing the wall. Does Ethan know what is actually in that glass? The silence behind me lasted just long enough to tell me the answer was not simple. Ethan knows part of it, Frank said carefully. Not all of it. And that distinction matters more than you might think right now. I turned around. Show me, I said. Show me exactly what my son knows. Frank opened a second application on the laptop, an audio player simple interface, a single long waveform displayed in blue against a dark background. He pressed play without preamble, the way a doctor pulls back a bandage. Fast, because there is no gentle version of what comes next. The first voice I heard was Ethan's. I knew my son's voice the way I knew my own heartbeat. I had been listening to it for 40 years, from his first thin cry in a delivery room at Methodist Hospital to the deep, unhurried baritone he had grown into by the time he took his seat on the Cole and Partners board. I knew the particular texture of it when he was tired, when he was nervous, when he was trying to convince me of something he was not entirely convinced of himself. What I heard in the recording was that last one, Ethan convincing himself. Diana, I don't know about this. Dad built everything himself. If we just talked to him, really sat down and laid it out, he might surprise us. Then Diana's voice. I had heard it hundreds of times across dinner tables and holiday gatherings and quarterly reviews. Warm, measured. The kind of voice that made you feel you were being listened to, really listened to, right up until the moment you realized the listening had always been a form of assessment. Talk to him. She said it like the idea was almost charming in its naivety. Ethan. We have been talking to him for 3 years. He won't release operational control. He won't reduce his board presence. He makes decisions for a company that needs to move at the speed of the current market, and he moves at the speed of 1995. You know this. A pause. I could hear Ethan exhale that long, reluctant breath of a man who wants to be argued out of something, but cannot find the counter-argument. Just the signature, Ethan said finally. That's all that changes. He still lives in the house, he's still comfortable. Nothing actually happens to him, right? He just steps back. Of course, Diana said. He signs, he steps back, he's taken care of properly. That is all this is. Frank reached over and stopped the recording. The warehouse felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. The work lights seemed harsher, the shadows at the edges of the room deeper. Sophie had gone very still beside me, and I could hear her breathing shallow, controlled the breathing of a young person, trying very hard to hold themselves together in a situation no 16-year-old should ever have to sit inside. I did not trust my voice for a moment. I stood there with the sound of my son's voice still hanging in the air, like smoke after a fire. And I felt something move through my chest that I can only describe as the specific grief of recognition. The grief of hearing something you suspected was true, and discovering that suspicion was not even close to the full measure of it. He didn't know about the drug, I said. It came out rougher than I intended, scraped at the edges. You can hear it. He thought it was just a signature. Correct, Frank said. Based on everything we've collected, Ethan believed the plan was a pressure signing. Diana presenting the power of attorney, the legal team present, to execute it on the spot, social pressure, and a prepared argument about the company's direction. He expected a difficult conversation, possibly a confrontation. He did not know about the sedative. He did not know about the Meridian Care vehicle. Frank paused. And he does not know about the third element. Something in his tone made the hair on the back of my arms stand up. What third element? Frank reached into the folder again and placed a document on the table between us. Not a Houston document. The header showed an insurance company I did not recognize, a policy number, a coverage amount that made my stomach drop. This is a life insurance policy, Frank said. It was executed 7 months ago. The insured party is Ethan Cole. He let a beat pass. The sole beneficiary is Diana Cole. I picked up the document. My hands were not shaking. Now they had gone past, shaking into something worse. A kind of preternatural steadiness that the body sometimes produces when the shock is large enough that the nervous system simply stops trying to process it in real time. The coverage amount was $4 million. She took out a $4 million policy on my son's life, I said, and put herself as the only person who collects. 7 months ago, Frank said. 3 months after she began meeting with Gerald Holt and Marcus Webb. The timeline is not coincidental. I set the document down because holding it was no longer something I was willing to do. I had built Cole and Partners over 4 decades by being able to read a room, read a deal, read a person well enough to know when something was genuine and when something was a vehicle for something else entirely. I had read Diana wrong for 8 years. 8 years of Christmases and board meetings and Sunday dinners and quarterly reports. 8 years of watching her sit beside my son and thinking grateful I had actually felt grateful that Ethan had found someone capable and steady and smart. Sophie's voice came from beside me, barely above a whisper, cracked down the middle with something that sounded like it had been building for days. She was going to get rid of him too, wasn't she? It was not a question. She already knew. She had probably known on some level since the moment she heard that phone call. I could not bring myself to answer her with words. Instead, I reached over and pulled her into my side, and she turned her face into my shoulder, and finally let the tears come. Not the quiet, controlled trembling from the warehouse entrance. This was the real thing. The tears of a girl who had been carrying an unspeakable weight alone for 3 days, who had done everything right, and held herself together through all of it, and was now in this specific moment completely done, pretending it was fine. I held her, and I let her cry, and I stared at the table and the document and the waveform still frozen on the laptop screen, and I felt the particular weight of a man who understands fully and without any remaining illusion exactly what kind of danger he walked away from tonight and what kind his son is still walking straight toward. "There is something else," Frank said quietly, giving Sophie another few seconds before he continued. "Something that explains why Diana believed this would work, why she was confident enough to attempt it." He closed the insurance document and opened a third file. Older. The date on the header was 2019. This is not the first time she has done this. My head came up. Frank turned the laptop screen to face me, and at the top of the document in clean black type was a name I had never heard before. Diana Marsh. Diana Marsh. I said the name out loud, slowly turning it over in my mouth like a piece of glass I was trying to identify by feel. "That is not her name," I said. "Diana's maiden name is Reeves, Diana Reeves. She used it on our paperwork when she and Ethan filed their joint taxes the first year. Diana Reeves is the name on her current identification," Frank said. "Diana Marsh is the name she used before she moved to Houston." He turned the laptop to face me fully. "I need you to look at this photograph first." The image on the screen was a candid shot, the kind taken without the subject's knowledge, slightly grainy, the timestamp in the corner, reading March 2019. A woman standing outside a restaurant in what looked like Midtown Atlanta. Dark hair, well-dressed, a smile directed at someone off camera that was warm and open and completely, utterly convincing. My chest seized. "That is Diana," I said. Not a question, not a doubt. The jawline, the posture, the particular way she held her shoulders back, 22 years younger, different hair length, different city, but I would have known her anywhere. That is absolutely Diana, taken by an Atlanta PD surveillance unit in March of 2019, Frank said. At that time, she was operating under the name Diana Marsh and had been in Atlanta for approximately 2 years. He pulled his chair closer to the table and leaned forward, both forearms flat on the surface, the posture of a man who has delivered terrible news before and knows the only way through it is forward. The subject she was photographed with, the man she was smiling at, was Harold Benning, 71 years old, widower, owner of a regional hospitality group, 7 hotels across Georgia and South Carolina, net worth estimated at $11 million. I felt my throat tighten. "What happened to him?" "The same thing that was planned for you tonight," Frank said. Methodically, patiently, over the course of 18 months. He opened another document. She positioned herself as a financial consultant, introduced through a mutual acquaintance that we now believe she cultivated specifically for that purpose. By month 6, she had Benning's complete trust. By month 12, she had moved into an advisory role within his business. At month 18, Harold Benning signed a durable power of attorney, granting full authority to a holding company Diana had incorporated under a different name. 3 months after that, he was admitted to a private care facility outside Atlanta, diagnosed with moderate cognitive decline by a physician who we later confirmed received a payment of $35,000 4 weeks before the evaluation. The air in that warehouse felt thin. I drew a slow breath and willed myself to keep listening, because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was not something I could afford right now. He died, I said. It was not a question either. I could feel the ending of the story, the way you feel weather coming in your bones before it arrives. 15 months after admission, Frank said. No family present. His 2 adult children had attempted to visit multiple times and been turned away. Diana had arranged for his mail and calls to be filtered, which is unfortunately legal if the POA holder instructs the facility to do so. By the time Benning passed, every asset had been transferred. The holding company was dissolved 6 weeks after his death. Diana Marsh disappeared from Atlanta's public records shortly after. Sophie had gone completely rigid beside me. I could feel the tension radiating off her like heat. She was gripping the edge of her chair with both hands and staring at the photograph on the screen with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not grief, not anger, but something far more devastating. The look of a child who has just understood that the person who drove her to school and made her lunches and helped with her homework for 8 years was not who she believed at all. Sophie, I said quietly. I'm fine, she said in the voice of someone who is very much not fine, but has decided this is not the time to fall apart. I did not argue with her. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is keep their feet under them for 10 more minutes. Why wasn't she prosecuted? I asked, turning back to Frank. If Atlanta PD had surveillance, if the FBI opened a file, because Harold Benning was dead, Frank said. No victim, no living complainant. The transfers had been executed legally. Benning signed everything while he was still technically competent by any existing medical record. Diana's documentation was clean. The physician's payment was run through a consulting invoice that looked legitimate on paper. The Atlanta field office opened a preliminary inquiry but could not establish fraud beyond reasonable doubt, with only circumstantial evidence and a deceased subject. He paused. They kept the file open. It has been sitting inactive for 4 years, until 72 hours ago when Derek contacted me and I contacted them. You connected the 2 cases, I said. Fingerprints and facial recognition, Frank said. Diana Reeves in Houston and Diana Marsh in Atlanta are the same person. The FBI Atlanta field office confirmed the match yesterday morning. That match is what gave us sufficient grounds to request a federal search warrant for the cloud storage data from your smart home system. I straightened. The cameras she deleted. When we first gained access to your property records, Frank said, we found that the local recording device, the NVR box, in your utility room, had been manually disabled. Diana had done it herself 3 weeks ago. She believed that erased everything. He paused. She didn't know about the cloud backup. Your smart home system links automatically to a server maintained by the manufacturer. Every 6 hours, automatically, the system backs up all recorded footage to that external server. Diana disabled the local NVR, the physical recording box in your utility room. She did not know about the cloud backup because the feature was added in a firmware update 18 months ago and is not prominently advertised. He turned the second laptop toward me. We have 22 days of footage. Every conversation that took place in the common areas of your home, every meeting, every phone call made within range of the interior cameras. 22 days, 3 weeks of Diana's planning captured in high definition on a cloud server she did not know existed, handed to the FBI on a digital platter because of an automatic software update. Play it, I said. We have reviewed the significant portions, Frank said. I can show you the 2 most material recordings, but Mr. Cole, he stopped. Before I do, you should know that we also have a live connection to that same system. The cameras are still active, which means we can see right now exactly what is happening inside your house. My heart rate spiked so hard I felt it in my fingertips. Show me, I said. Show me what's happening in my house right now. Frank turned the second laptop toward me and pulled up the live feed without a word. 3 windows, 6:18 p.m. The timestamp felt like a countdown I had not been told about. I leaned forward until my face was close enough to the screen that I could see the grain of the image, and what I saw made my stomach drop straight through the floor. 4 people were arranged across my living room, like chess pieces positioned before a match begins. I recognized the furniture, the arrangement of it, the painting above the fireplace that Margaret had chosen the year we moved in. And sitting in the middle of all that familiar warmth spread across my coffee table like a surgical kit laid out before an operation were documents, folders, a laptop, a portable notary stamp sitting in its open case. The man in the blue blazer opening the laptop, Frank said, his voice low and even, is Gerald Holt. Gerald Holt was somewhere in his early 50s, unremarkable in appearance, the kind of man you would not look at twice in a grocery store. He had the slightly distracted air of a professional who has done something enough times that it no longer requires his full attention. He was scrolling through something on his screen with one hand and reaching for a glass of water with the other, and the casual ease of his movements made something cold and reptilian move through my gut. Marcus Webb is beside him, Frank continued. The other 2 individuals near the window are the witnesses. I shifted my eyes to the kitchen feed without being asked. Diana was standing at the marble island, my marble island. The one I had argued was too expensive when we remodeled in 2018, and Margaret had talked me into anyway, and she was doing something I could not immediately identify. Her back was partially to the camera. Her movements were small, precise, unhurried. Then she turned slightly, and I saw the glass. It was set apart from the others. A crystal highball, the good set. The one we brought out for special occasions, sitting alone on a silver cocktail tray, about 8 inches to the right of the bar cart. Everything else on that tray was decoration. That glass was the point. The treated glass is already prepared, Frank said quietly. My jaw clamped shut so hard my back teeth ached. I watched Diana straighten up, smooth her dress with both hands, and reach for her phone. She checked it. Her expression did not change, calm, composed, the practiced serenity of a woman who has been waiting for something for a long time and has learned how to do it without showing the wait. Then I looked at the front entry feed. Ethan was standing on the front porch. He had his back to the camera, facing the driveway, hands in the pockets of his navy suit, the one he wore to board meetings, the one I always teased him for keeping pressed, like he was expecting an inspection. He was looking at his phone. Then he put the phone away and looked at the driveway. Then he looked at his phone again. He was waiting for me. His father, who was supposed to land in 3 hours. His father, who was going to walk through that door and sit down and drink from that glass. Something broke open inside my chest that I do not have a clean word for. It was not anger. I had moved past anger somewhere around the time Frank said the words Harold Benning. It was not grief either, though grief was threaded through it. It was closer to the feeling of watching someone you love walk toward the edge of something they cannot see, and knowing that if you call out too soon, they might panic and fall faster. He doesn't know, I said, and my voice came out barely above a whisper, rough at every edge. He's standing out there waiting for me, and he has no idea that glass is sitting in the kitchen. No, Frank said. He doesn't. And the car, I said. I shifted to the driveway feed, scanning the frame. You said it was 2 blocks out. We have eyes on it, Frank confirmed. It has not moved. The driver has been in position since 4 o'clock. I watched Ethan check his phone one more time. Watched his shoulders rise and fall with a breath I could not hear, but could feel because I had watched that particular set of shoulders breathe for 40 years, and I knew what it looked like when my son was trying to be patient about something that was making him anxious. How much time before the party is supposed to start? I asked. Invitation said 7 o'clock, Frank said. We have approximately 40 minutes. I looked at each feed in turn. The living room Holt's open laptop, Webb's neat stack of folders, the notary stamp sitting in its case like a weapon waiting to be loaded. The kitchen, Diana's composed profile, the isolated glass on the silver tray. The porch, Ethan's back, the driveway, the dark and the rain-wet street beyond. 40 minutes. 40 minutes before I was supposed to walk through that door and sit down to a birthday celebration that had been engineered from its invitation list to its glassware as the last night of my independent life. Sophie had come to stand just behind my left shoulder. I could feel her there, without looking the particular warmth and solidity of her, the steadiness that this girl had somehow maintained through 3 days of carrying something that would have buckled most grown adults. She had not said anything since Frank opened the live feed, but I heard her draw one sharp breath when Diana appeared on the kitchen camera, and then I heard her bring it back under control, and that small act of discipline from a 16-year-old girl hit me somewhere so deep it nearly undid me completely. Grandpa. Her voice was quiet, close to my ear. What are we going to do? I straightened up from the screen. Every muscle in my back protested the movement. 68 years and 13 days of Chicago conference rooms, making themselves known all at once. I looked at Frank across the table, and he looked back at me with the expression of a man who has laid out every card he has and is now waiting to see what the other player does with them. The evidence you have, I said. The cloud footage, the Atlanta file, the toxicology report, Walter's sample. Is it enough? For an arrest warrant, Frank said. Yes. I submitted the package to the FBI Houston field office 2 hours ago. The duty AUSA, that's the Assistant United States Attorney who reviews warrant applications after hours, has the file. We are waiting on confirmation. And if I walk into that house tonight, I said, with you and whoever else you can get there in 40 minutes, does that help or hurt? Frank considered that for exactly 3 seconds. It closes the trap, he said. Diana's plan requires your absence tonight to be unexplained. If you never show up, she has to improvise. But if you walk through that door on your own terms with federal agents behind you, she has nowhere to go. The evidence is already collected. The warrant is already in process. Your presence tonight turns this from a near miss into a completed case. I looked back at the screen one last time. Ethan on the porch. Diana in the kitchen. The glass on the silver tray. Then let's close it, I said. Frank did not react to those 3 words the way most people react to a declaration. He did not nod enthusiastically, or clap his hands together, or say anything that sounded remotely like encouragement. What he did was look at me for a long, steady moment, the look of a man taking an accurate measurement, and then he said, "All right, but we do this my way." "Your way," I repeated. "You walk in under your own power on your own terms, because it is your house and you have every right to be there. You do not approach Diana. You do not approach Ethan. You do not touch anything, move anything, or speak to any of the individuals who are there in a professional capacity until the agents have made contact." He held my gaze without blinking. "Can you do that?" I thought about that glass on the silver tray. I thought about the document with my name on it in clean professional type. I thought about Harold Benning dying alone in a room while his children were turned away at the door. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." Frank was already reaching for his phone. "I need to make 2 calls. Derek will take Sophie in his car. You ride with me." He glanced at Sophie. "You stay behind your grandfather at all times once we're inside. You do not engage with your mother under any circumstances. Understood?" Sophie's chin came up, that particular angle of jaw that she had inherited from Margaret, the one that meant she was holding herself together by pure force of will. "Understood," she said in a voice that was steadier than it had any right to be. Frank stepped away to make his calls, and I moved to the side entrance of the warehouse, pushing the door open a few inches to let in the night air. The rain had thinned to almost nothing, just a fine mist, now the kind that settles on your face and your collar, without you noticing until you are already damp. The gravel lot was dark and quiet, and smelled of wet earth and rust, and I stood there breathing it in and letting the cold work its way through my jacket, because I needed something physical and real to anchor me to the present moment. I heard Sophie's footsteps on the concrete behind me. She came and stood beside me in the gap of the door, close enough that our shoulders touched. "You don't have to come," I said. "Frank can arrange for someone to stay with you here." "I know," she said. "I'm coming anyway." I looked down at her, this girl who had sat alone with an unbearable secret for 3 days, who had gone through desk drawers and sent a text message to a stranger, and held herself together through the kind of evening that would have sent most adults completely to pieces. Her eyes were still slightly red at the corners, but her jaw was set, and her shoulders were straight, and she was looking out into the dark lot with an expression that was all her grandmother's. "Sophie," I said, and my voice came out rough, cracked at the seam. "I need to say something to you." She turned to look at me, and I could see in her face that she was bracing the way young people brace when they expect an adult to tell them something that is going to require more endurance. "I owe you an apology," I said. That was not what she expected. I watched the bracing soften into something open and uncertain. "Grandpa, let me finish." I turned to face her fully. "I have been in that house for 8 years. I sat at that dinner table, and I watched your mother, and I did not see it. I was so focused on the company, on the next deal, on keeping Cole and partners moving forward, that I did not pay attention to what was happening right in front of me." My throat tightened to the point where the words had to push through with force. "You saw it. You heard it. You acted on it alone at 16 years old, because the adults in your life were not doing their jobs. And I am sorry for that. I am deeply, genuinely sorry." Sophie's eyes filled up fast, the way eyes do when something breaks through a wall that has been holding for too long. Her bottom lip pressed together hard. She blinked twice, rapid fire, fighting it. "Pop," she said, the name she'd called me when she was small before she grew into the more formal grandpa. The name that appeared now without either of us planning it. I wasn't brave. I was terrified the whole time. "That's exactly what brave is," I said. "Terrified and doing it anyway." She made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and pressed her forehead against my shoulder for just a moment, 2 seconds, 3, and I put my arm around her and held on and felt the particular weight of gratitude that has no adequate expression in language. Frank appeared in this doorway behind us. "Warrant is in final review," he said. 40 minutes, maybe less. HPD has 2 units staged 3 blocks out. We move in 20. He looked at the two of us. "You have about 15 minutes in the car." I'd use them. The drive back toward my neighborhood was unlike any drive I had ever taken through Houston. The same streets I had traveled thousands of times, the same exits and overpasses and strip malls, and the particular amber glow of the sodium vapor lights on the main arterials looked completely altered the way a familiar room looks different in the dark. I sat in the front passenger seat of Frank's car, and Sophie sat directly behind me, and none of us spoke for the first few minutes, each of us inside our own version of what was coming. It was Sophie who broke first. "Grandpa, do you think Dad knew about the glass?" The question landed like a stone into still water. I stared through the windshield at the road ahead. "No," I said. "I don't." "But he knew about the rest of it. The papers." "Yes," I said. "He knew about that." She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her working through it, the way she used to work through long division at the kitchen table, methodical, not rushing. "Do you hate him?" The word hate sat in the air between us like something that needed to be handled carefully. I thought about Ethan's voice on that recording, the reluctance in it, the way he had said just the signature, like those words were a comfort he was giving himself. I thought about a boy who grew up in a house where his father was always one more deal away from being fully present, and what kind of space that leaves in a person for someone else to move into. "No," I said. "I don't hate him. I am furious at him. I am heartbroken. But I do not hate my son." Sophie absorbed that. Then she said quietly, "He's going to lose everything, isn't he?" I did not answer that with the softening instinct that sometimes takes over when you want to protect someone you love from a truth that is too sharp. Sophie had earned the unvarnished version. "He is going to face serious consequences," I said. "What those consequences look like will depend on choices he makes in the next few hours." Frank's phone buzzed on the center console. He glanced at it, and I saw his jaw tighten in a way that meant something had moved. "Warrant signed," he said. "We've got it." He looked at me, and I looked at the road ahead, and somewhere in the distance, the lights of my neighborhood were beginning to take shape through the mist. "There is one more thing you need to know before we go in," Frank said. "About Walter Price." Walter Price had worked in my house for 25 years. That is not a sentence I say lightly, because 25 years is not an employment relationship. It is something closer to the grain of the wood. In the walls, something so woven into the daily texture of a place that you stop noticing it, the way you stop noticing the weight of a ring you have worn for decades. Walter had been there when Margaret was alive, when Ethan was a teenager, coming home late and pretending otherwise when Cole and Partners went through its worst year, and I spent 3 months sleeping 4 hours a night. He had been there for all of it, quiet and reliable and utterly steady, the way the best people in a life always are. I had not thought enough about what it cost him to do what he did this morning. Frank kept his eyes on the road as he spoke. At approximately 11:30 this morning, Walter was preparing to leave the house as Diana had instructed. He was collecting his personal items when he passed the hallway outside the main study. "Diana's phone call," I said. "She did not know Walter was still in the house," Frank said. What Walter heard her say was this: "After tonight, this house only needs one master." The words settled into the car like smoke, slow, pervasive. The kind of thing that gets into everything and does not come out. My neighborhood was close now. I could feel it in the way the streets were narrowing, and the trees were getting taller. "He told me later he knew something was wrong from the first week Diana moved in," Frank continued. "Small things. The way she rearranged the staff schedule without consulting him. The way certain phone calls always happened after the household staff had been sent on errands. The way she watched a room not like a woman who lived there, but like a woman calculating what it was worth." Sophie spoke from the back seat. "He told you that?" "He told me everything. When he called me, he was sitting in his car 2 blocks from the house, with the sample from the bar set in a Ziploc bag in his jacket pocket. He said, and I am quoting accurately, 'I don't know who you are, but the young lady said you were the right person to call. I have something you need, and I cannot leave until I have given it to someone who can use it.'" My jaw ached. I had not realized until that moment how long I had been holding it clenched. "Without that sample, we have cloud footage and a circumstantial case," Frank said. "With it, we have physical corroboration of criminal intent. The difference between a case a defense attorney can chip away at and a case that holds in federal court is often exactly one piece of physical evidence. Walter Price gave us that piece. Where is he now? I asked. A hotel 3 miles from here. He has been there since 2 o'clock waiting. Something in my chest ached with a very specific kind of pain, the pain of understanding, too late, how much someone gave without being asked. He took something with him when he left the house, Frank said. He produced a photograph with one hand keeping his other on the wheel. I took it. It was a family photograph, taken in the backyard in late summer 2005. Margaret in a yellow dress, laughing. Ethan at 17, grinning wide. Me in the middle, 10 years younger and 10 years less worn. And Walter on the far right, standing just slightly outside the family grouping, the way he always did at family events, wearing the particular careful smile of a man who is genuinely happy, but not certain he has the right to show it. He said he did not know when he would be allowed back, Frank said. He said he could not leave it behind. Sophie reached forward and touched the edge of the photograph with 2 fingers, just barely. I heard her breath catch. Then she pressed her hand against her mouth and turned to look out the window, her shoulders rising and falling, with the careful rhythm of someone working very hard not to come apart. I want to see him, I said, my voice low and rough. After tonight, whatever happens, I want to see Walter. That is already arranged, Frank said quietly. The car made a turn. I recognized the long curve with the old magnolia trees lining both shoulders. My house was 4 minutes away, maybe 3. He knew for 8 years something was wrong, I said, and he stayed anyway. Some people stay, Frank said simply, because leaving feels like abandonment. I held the photograph and looked at Walter's careful, contained smile and felt the full weight of 25 years land on me all at once. Not as a burden, as a gift I had not known to be grateful for until the moment I nearly lost everything. Frank's phone buzzed. He listened for 4 seconds and ended the call. HPD units are in position. Agents are staged. We are clear to move. He looked over at me one last time. Mr. Cole, when we walk through that door, whatever you see, whatever is said, remember one thing. What's that? I asked. You already won, he said. Everything after this is just the formality. Frank pulled onto the main road, and the warehouse disappeared behind us, swallowed up by the dark and the mist. The way a bad dream dissolves when you open your eyes. But this was not a dream. The warrant was signed. The agents were staged. And somewhere ahead of us, through 3 miles of wet Houston streets and magnolia-lined curves, my house was lit up and waiting. I had made this drive 10,000 times. In every kind of weather, in every kind of mood, coming home from deals that had gone well, and deals that had gone badly, and flights that had left me too tired to think. I knew every turn by feel, every landmark by reflex, the old water tower at the intersection of Westheimer, the stone wall that marked the entrance to the neighborhood, the particular way the streetlights came through the canopy of live oaks on the last quarter mile, and through moving shadows across the road. Tonight, every one of those familiar things felt like it belonged to a version of my life that had ended sometime around 5:17 that afternoon. Sophie reached forward from the back seat and placed her hand over mine on the armrest. She did not say anything. She just set her hand there, warm and small and completely steady, and I turned my palm up and held it. You know what I keep thinking about, I said. What? The watch. I could feel the shopping bag on the floor by my feet. I had retrieved it from Derek's car before we left the warehouse, some stubborn instinct refusing to leave it behind. I spent 4 days tracking down that Patek Philippe. Flew to 3 different dealers. I had this whole picture in my head of Ethan's face when he opened the box. My voice tightened at the edges. I was so proud of finding it. Sophie's fingers pressed against mine. He would have loved it, Pop. He still might, I said. And I meant it not as comfort, not as denial, but as the only form of hope I had available in that moment. Whatever Ethan had done, whatever was going to happen in the next 30 minutes, and the months that followed, he was still my son. That was a fact that existed independently of everything else, the way bedrock exists independently of what gets built on top of it. Oh. Frank's radio crackled from the front, a short burst of static, and a voice I did not recognize confirming positions. Frank responded in clipped, efficient language, the shorthand of people who have done coordinated operations before and know how to move fast with minimal noise. 2 minutes, he said. I looked out the window. The stone wall was coming up on the right, pale gray against the dark, wet and gleaming under the streetlight. Beyond it, the live oaks closed over the road like a cathedral ceiling, and through the branches I could see for the first time the warm yellow glow of my house in the distance. 23 years I had lived there. Margaret and I had walked through that front door for the first time on a Saturday morning in early September, and she had stood in the entry hall and turned in a slow circle, looking at the ceiling, height, and the staircase, and the way the afternoon light came through the south-facing windows, and she had grabbed my hand and said, "Raymond, this is it. This is the one." I had not argued. I had learned early in our marriage that Margaret's instincts about what mattered were almost never wrong. She had been right about the house. She had been right about most things. I thought about what she would have said standing in that warehouse 2 hours ago watching the footage of Diana on the kitchen camera. I thought about what she would have said about Ethan, about Sophie, about the $4 million policy, and the man in Atlanta who died alone with his children, turned away at the door. She would not have said much. Margaret was not a woman who needed many words to make herself understood. She would have looked at me with those gray eyes that never missed anything, and she would have said simply, "Fix it, Raymond." Sophie squeezed my hand. "Grandpa, we're here." Frank had turned into the driveway approach and stopped the car. Through the windshield, I could see the iron gate, the circular drive, the front door with its brass fixtures catching the porch light. 2 unmarked HPD units were parked on the side street to the left, dark and quiet. 3 agents in plain clothes were positioned along the property line, visible only if you knew to look. "We go on my signal," Frank said. "Stay close, stay behind the agents, and do not engage until I say." He looked at me directly. "Mr. Cole, are you ready?" I looked at that front door. 68 years old. 13 days in Chicago. A shopping bag with a birthday watch and a bottle of scotch that no one was going to drink tonight. A granddaughter with her hand in mine and her grandmother's eyes and more courage than anyone in that house had given her credit for. "I've had 68 years of practice," I said. "Let's go." I had stood in front of this gate 1,000 times in my life, but I had never once needed to stop and remind myself to breathe before walking through it. 23 years inside these walls. I knew every step of the front path by feel, knew the particular sound the main door made when it swung open, knew the smell of warm oak from the hallway floor on winter evenings. I had walked through that gate after deals that made me and deals that broke me, after the morning we buried Margaret, after long weeks away, when coming home was the only thing keeping me upright. But tonight was the first time I had to tell myself one breath, just one. Then move. Frank stood to my left, 2 federal agents behind him. Sophie pressed close at my back. Derek had stayed with the car. His part ended here. Inside, lights burned in every room. Soft music drifted through the glass, the kind Diana put on when she was expecting company. Everything looked exactly the way a birthday celebration was supposed to look. Everything except the white SUV parked 2 blocks east that I knew was waiting for me. I pushed the gate open. The front door was unlocked, a habit Margaret had kept that nobody had thought to change. I walked in without knocking. This was my house. I had never needed to knock. The entry hall opened around me, white marble floors, the crystal chandelier. Margaret had spent 3 weeks selecting the ceramic bowl where everyone dropped their keys. Everything exactly as I had left it 13 days ago. From the front parlor, voices. My footsteps on the marble. and then silence. Ethan looked up from the sofa first, sitting with his hands folded on his knees, the way he used to sit in church as a boy. When his eyes found me, the color left his face so completely, it looked like someone had pulled a plug deep inside him. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Gerald Holt stood up by reflex, saw Frank and the agents, and sat back down much more slowly than he had risen. Marcus Webb didn't stand at all. He looked at the document folder on the coffee table, then toward the far door the way a man looks at a fire exit he knows he won't reach. Footsteps from the kitchen, heels on marble. Diana walked in with her phone in one hand. She looked up and saw me. 1 second, and I saw the face beneath the face. Not fear, not guilt. Calculation, cold and practiced. Then the mask came back, smooth as a shutter closing. "Raymond, you're early." Warm voice, perfect surprise. "We were setting up, you weren't supposed to see the—" I didn't look at Diana. I looked at Ethan. My son rose from the sofa slowly, like a man moving through deep water. I watched his hands, fingers trembling in a way I had not seen since he was 7 years old. "Dad!" His voice fractured. I didn't know. Ethan, one word, steady. The room went completely still. Frank stepped forward. "Mrs. Diana Cole, my name is Frank Morrow. I'm coordinating with the FBI Houston field office. I have a federal arrest warrant signed by a United States magistrate judge at 6:48 this evening." Holt and Webb said nothing. They sat like men who had understood from the beginning that a courtroom was always the last stop on this route. Diana didn't look at Frank. She looked at Ethan. "This was your plan. Your name is on every contract in that room, not mine." I watched my son's face change in layers. Confusion first, then understanding, then something between devastation and horror I had no name for and didn't want one. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Sophie's hand pressed lightly against my back, steady and warm. Just there. Sometimes that is everything one person can give another. "I need my attorney," Diana said. Flat, precise, not a tremor anywhere. "That's already arranged," Frank said and nodded to the agents. As they moved toward her, Diana did not look at me, did not look at Ethan, did not look at the silver tray in the kitchen with the single crystal glass she had prepared for me that evening. She looked straight ahead, the way a person looks when they are walking into the next meeting, the next plan already assembled and waiting. That was the last thing I saw of Diana that night, before everything shifted into a different chapter entirely. There are things that fall apart loudly, arguments that fill rooms, accusations that bounce off walls, the kind of collapse that announces itself. And there are things that fall apart in complete silence in the space between one breath and the next, where no sound is adequate to what is actually breaking. Ethan's collapse was the second kind. By the time the living room had been secured, and Gerald Holt and Marcus Webb were seated apart from each other, with HPD officers stationed at both exits, my son had moved to the far end of the room and sat down in the armchair by the window. The chair he had always taken as a teenager when we watched football on Sunday afternoons, the chair that faced the garden. He sat in it now with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he did not move. Diana stood near the hallway door. The composure was still there. She had not abandoned it even now, but it had the quality of something being worn rather than felt. A costume, not a character. Frank had laid out the camera footage on his tablet. 3 weeks of cloud recordings, Diana's meetings in my study. The conversations with Holt and Webb captured clearly enough that every word was audible. 2 HPD detectives were reviewing it at the dining table. The evidence was self-explanatory. It did not need interpretation. Diana watched this happen and said nothing for a long time. Then she said quietly, without heat, the way a person makes a calculation out loud, "The cloud backup is inadmissible without a valid warrant." "The warrant was signed at 6:48 this evening," Frank said without looking up. "Before we entered the premises." Diana absorbed that. 1 beat. 2. Then the sedative compound in the kitchen, I have no knowledge of how that came to be in this house. Walter Price collected the sample this morning, Frank said. Signed chain of custody. Lab results were confirmed at 4 this afternoon. He looked at her steadily. We also have the recording from your phone call to your assistant, made at 11:32 a.m. in the study, while you believed the house was empty. Something shifted in Diana's expression, not fear, not guilt, but the specific recalibration of a person who has just learned that one of their assumptions was wrong and is immediately determining which of their remaining positions still holds. She looked across the room at Ethan. He had not moved from the chair. He still had his face in his hands. But at the sound of her pause, the particular weighted silence of someone about to speak, his shoulders tightened. Ethan. Her voice was almost gentle. Almost. Tell them this was your idea. Tell them I was following your lead on the business arrangements. It's the cleaner version, for both of us. Ethan lifted his face from his hands. I had spent 40 years watching people negotiate, watching the moment when someone across a table reveals what they actually want, beneath the architecture of what they've said they want. I had watched that moment in boardrooms and courtrooms and on the phone at 2 in the morning when deals were falling apart and people stopped performing and started being honest out of desperation. This was not negotiation. This was something rawer than that. My son looked at the woman he had married 8 years ago, and I watched him actually see her, for the first time. Not the woman who had built a life beside him. The woman who had built a position around him, using him as a wall, intending to step out from behind that wall at the moment of her choosing, and leave him standing in the open. Diana. His voice was wrecked, scraped hollow. Stop! I'm trying to help you. Stop. He said it again, sharper this time, and the word carried something I had not heard from my son in years. Not anger. Something older and more absolute than anger. The sound of a person who has finally reached the bottom of something and found solid ground under their feet, even if the ground is terrible. He looked at Frank. I'll cooperate fully. Complete disclosure. Whatever you need. Frank nodded. We'll need that in writing with your attorney present. I understand. Ethan's eyes moved to me just for a moment, just long enough to hold. Then he looked down at his hands. Diana said nothing more. She stood by the hallway door, with the stillness of someone who had made their last move and was now simply waiting to see the board. Frank stepped toward her. Diana Cole, also known as Diana Marsh, I need you to come with me. She turned and walked toward the door without being led. Still upright, still controlled. And as she passed through the doorway into the entry hall, she did not look at Ethan. Not once. Not a backward glance. Not a flicker. That more than anything else that had happened in that room told me everything I needed to know about what 8 years of my son's life had actually been. Sophie was beside me. She had been there since we entered, quiet and steady, her hand on my arm. She watched Diana disappear through the doorway and then looked up at me. She never looked back, Sophie said quietly. No, I said. She didn't. Sophie was silent for a moment. Then, is Dad going to be okay? I looked across the room at Ethan sitting in the old armchair, staring at the window, the garden dark behind the glass. 40 years old. The weight of what the next months would ask of him already visible in the set of his shoulders. He's going to face hard things, I said. But he made the right call just now. That matters. Sophie nodded slowly, the way she nods when she is filing something away rather than dismissing it. From the entry hall, the sound of the front door opening. The sound of the night outside Houston after rain. The particular quiet of a street that has been holding its breath and is finally releasing it. And from somewhere in the kitchen, a detail I had not yet attended to, a silver tray on the counter, and on it a single crystal highball glass untouched that had been waiting all evening for a man who never arrived to drink from it. I was that man. I looked at the glass from across the room, and I thought about Harold Benning, 71 years old, alone in a care facility in Atlanta, his children turned away at the door. I thought about the Macallan 25 years still in my shopping bag by the front door. I thought about a birthday I had flown home 4 hours early to surprise my son with, and the specific, irreversible way that tonight had not gone according to any plan any of us had made. Frank reappeared in the doorway. "Mr. Cole, everything is secured. When you're ready." I looked at my son one more time. Then I walked out of the living room and into whatever came next. Frank led us into the study, the room where the cloud cameras had recorded 3 weeks of Diana's planning sessions, the room where I had sat at my desk every morning for 20 years and signed the contracts that built Cole and Partners from nothing, and which now felt as unfamiliar to me as a room I had wandered into by mistake. The door closed behind us. No agents inside. No HPD officers. No Diana, no Holt. No Webb. Just 3 people, me, Frank, and my son, in the room where I had worked through the nights of the early years, where I had watched through the window on the morning Margaret dawned, and told myself there was still reason to continue. Ethan sat down in the chair across from my desk. The first time all evening, he had sat facing me without Diana somewhere in the space between us. The navy suit was still on, but the tie had been loosened. His eyes were red in the way of a man who has been crying, or is about to, and is holding the line through sheer will alone. Frank set the file on my desk. The cover read, "Diana Marsh, Atlanta, Georgia, 2019. "Ethan," Frank said, "what I'm about to tell you, you have never heard any of this before. I need you to hear all of it before you make any legal decisions." Ethan looked at the file, then at me, then he nodded. Frank started with Atlanta. His voice was economical, precise, the voice of a man who had recounted terrible things in interview rooms enough times to know that the only way through them was straight ahead. 6 years ago. Atlanta, Georgia. A woman named Diana Marsh identified an elderly widower, a man named Harold Benning, net worth $11 million, and spent 18 months dismantling his life from the inside. Power of attorney. A paid psychiatric evaluation. A private care facility. His children turned away at the door. Harold Benning died alone 15 months after admission. Every asset had been transferred before he drew his last breath. Frank let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. "Diana Marsh came to Houston shortly after," he said. "She changed her surname, and she found you." Ethan's face had gone the color of old concrete. "He had family," he finally said, voice barely a whisper. "The man in Atlanta, he had people who wanted to get to him." 2 adult children, Frank said. His son drove 4 hours and was turned away at the front desk. Ethan closed his eyes. 1 long breath in, 1 long breath out. Frank reached into the folder and placed a second document on the desk. This was executed 7 months ago. The document was a life insurance policy. The insured party was Ethan James Cole. The sole beneficiary was Diana Cole. The coverage amount sat at the top of the page in figures that didn't require a second reading to understand. $4 million. I watched my son read the document. And for the first time all evening, I did not see the 40-year-old man who had sat in the front parlor, waiting for his father to come home. I saw the 12-year-old boy who used to climb onto my shoulders to watch the 4th of July fireworks, who had grown up in a house where his father was always one deal away from being fully present, and had left exactly the kind of space that a person like Diana Marsh knew how to fill. "She was going to get rid of me too," Ethan said. His voice was hollow. "Once she had enough." Once the asset transfer was complete, Frank said, "You became a liability. The insurance policy would have made the next step financially logical." Ethan pressed both palms flat on the desk and looked at me directly. No deflection, no avoidance. "Dad, I'm sorry. I knew about the power of attorney. Diana said it was protection, that you'd been struggling with decisions at the company. I knew it wasn't right, and I let her—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't know about the sedative. I didn't know about the van. I didn't know she had taken out a policy on my own life." "I know," I said. 2 words. I let them stand without qualification, because they were the truest thing I had. Ethan exhaled a long, shuddering breath. He looked at Frank. I'll cooperate fully. Complete disclosure. Everything I know, every communication, every payment, I authorized all of it. Frank nodded. We'll need that formally with your attorney present, but your cooperation makes a material difference to how this proceeds. Frank's phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at it. The forensics team completed their analysis of the bar preparation set in the kitchen. The concentration of the sedative compound was significantly higher than our initial estimate. A pause. At that concentration, if you had consumed that glass tonight, the effects would not have been limited to disorientation. The medical consultant used the word incapacitation. At your age, the cardiac risk would have been significant. Ethan had gone completely still. His face had passed through white and arrived somewhere beyond it. She wasn't just trying to get your signature, he said, barely audible, speaking to the shape of what he had just understood. He couldn't finish it. He didn't need to. I reached across the desk and placed my hand over my son's. He looked down at it, then up at me, and I watched 40 years of everything we had ever been to each other exist in a single moment, without either of us needing to name it. Whatever comes next, I said quietly, we face it, you and I, straight ahead. Ethan turned his palm up and held on. And outside the study door, the sounds of the house being processed by people doing their jobs continued, methodical, official, unhurried, while the two of us sat in the room where Cole and Partners had been built from nothing, and began the long, necessary work of figuring out what came after everything fell apart. It was past 9 o'clock when Frank's car pulled up in front of the Marriott on Westheimer, a modest hotel, nothing like the places I usually stayed. But Walter Price had never been a man who asked for more than what he needed. Frank had moved him out quietly 3 days earlier, with nothing but a duffel bag, his medication, and one photograph he refused to leave behind. I knew which one before. Frank even described it, Margaret's 62nd birthday, the three of us in the backyard, with the magnolia in full bloom. Walter in his gray vest pretending he wasn't part of the family, when everyone who mattered knew perfectly well that he was. The door opened before I finished knocking. Walter looked older than the last time I'd seen him, and smaller the way people shrink when fear has been sitting on their shoulders too long. His white hair was combed neatly, his shirt buttoned to the collar even at this hour. When his eyes found mine, they went immediately to pieces. "Mr. Cole?" His voice broke on both words. "Walter." Mine wasn't doing much better. He grabbed my hand with both of his grip, still surprisingly strong, his chin trembling with the effort of holding himself together and losing the battle inch by inch. "I didn't know if you'd make it out," he said, voice thick. I kept thinking if she realized I'd been watching, if they found out about the sample. "It was enough," I said. "Walter, what you did saved everything." A sound came out of him, quiet and shuddering relief, so intense it had nowhere to go but out. His shoulders shook. His hands trembled against mine. Inside the room was tidy the way Walter always kept things, shoes lined at the foot of the bed, notepad and pen on the desk. The photograph of Margaret's birthday sat propped against the lamp on the nightstand. He sat on the edge of the bed, and the words came slowly, then unstoppably. "I knew something was wrong when she changed the security codes in August. She did it herself, didn't go through your service company." He steadied himself. "Then 3 weeks ago, I heard her on the phone in the study door not fully shut. She said after tonight, this house only needs one master." "You remembered those exact words. I wrote them down the moment I reached my room," he said firmly. "I didn't know what they meant yet. But Ms. Margaret used to say, a home with one master is just a building." His eyes filled. "I think she always meant you, Mr. Cole." The tightness in my chest climbed into my throat. I looked at the photograph, Margaret laughing, head thrown back, and let myself miss her completely, without defense for the first time in months. "The morning of October 9th, Walter continued, "she brought the Macallan bottle into the kitchen to decant it. Her phone rang. She stepped into the hallway. I had 90 seconds. He opened the desk drawer and produced a small Ziploc bag, a hotel glass inside with liquid pooled at the bottom. I didn't know if it was enough. It proved everything, I said. A sedative compound, fast-acting, colorless, 20 minutes to take effect. Walter's face went gray. His eyes squeezed shut, processing what those 90 seconds had prevented. "Oh, Lord," he whispered. I gripped his arm firmly. "Without that sample, everything else was circumstantial. You're the reason Diana is in handcuffs tonight." His eyes opened, wet and fierce and full of dignity. "I made a promise to Ms. Margaret," he said, voice rough but steady. "The day of her funeral, I stood at that grave and told her I'd look after you. I told her I wouldn't let anything happen to this family." He pressed his lips together hard. I kept my promise. My eyes burned in a way I hadn't allowed in a very long time. "You did, Walter," I managed. "Margaret would be proud." He ducked his head and pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, his whole body shaking once with the force of being truly seen. Frank knocked softly 20 minutes later. "Raymond, Ethan is asking for you." Walter straightened, eyes still red but back composed. "Go," he said quietly. "That boy needs his father more than I do tonight." I stood feeling the weight of what waited pressing down on both shoulders. "Get some rest," I told him. "Frank has someone outside this door all night." Walter touched the photograph, once fingertips light against Margaret's laughing face, and said softly, "Tell Ethan I'm praying for him." I pulled the door closed behind me. The hardest conversation of my life was still 20 minutes away. Frank drove me back to the house just before 10:30. The police vehicles were gone. The forensics team long packed up the dining room, photographed and cleared. The candles had finally burned down on their own. Ethan was in the study in my leather chair by the window, the one I used to sit in when he was small, and I'd read to him on Sunday mornings. Elbows on his knees, face in his hands, wearing an old gray pullover I recognized from years ago, like he'd needed something familiar to hold on to. Sophie was curled on the small sofa across the room, asleep under a blanket, her face finally peaceful in the way only sleep can manage after a day like this one. I stood in the doorway and looked at my son. The gray at his temples, the weight his shoulders were carrying, and felt the love and the fury and the grief press against each other inside my chest until I couldn't tell them apart. "She's been asleep about 20 minutes, he said without lifting his head. He always heard my footsteps, even as a kid. I didn't want to leave her alone. I pulled the desk chair over and sat facing him, knees almost touching. "Look at me, Ethan." His face was swollen and raw, the face of a man who had spent hours turning every decision of the last year over in his hands and understanding one by one what each of them had cost. "How much did you know?" I asked. Not accusatory, just direct. "The power of attorney," he said, exhaling shakily. "She told me it was just a precaution, that you'd been forgetting things, just paperwork to protect you." His voice cracked. I believed her. "What else?" "The party. She said it was a birthday dinner, that the lawyer was only there to witness a signature." His eyes flooded. "Dad, I swear I did not know about the sedative. I did not know about the insurance policy on my life. I did not know about the van." "Do you know why she married you?" He flinched like I'd struck him. "Diana Marsh," I said. 6 years ago, Atlanta. Elderly father, compliant son, same structure, same plan. She got out before charges locked in, came to Houston, changed her name, and found you. She chose this family deliberately, Ethan, before she ever walked through the front door." A sound came out of him, low and wrecked, like something tearing slowly. His whole frame heaved. "I loved her." The words scraped out raw and bleeding. "I actually loved her. I thought we were building something." "I know," I said, and let the fury bank down enough for the grief to come through. "That's what made you useful to her. You weren't her partner. You were a tool she hadn't finished using." He stared at me, eyes devastated. "That's not supposed to make me feel better." "It's not supposed to," I said. "It's supposed to be true." He wiped his face and looked at Sophie sleeping across the room, this 16-year-old girl who had called a stranger to save her grandfather, because no one else would. She did more to protect this family than I did, he said quietly. Yes, I said. She did. He accepted that without defense, and the fact that he could told me something important about who my son still was underneath all of this. What happens to us? He finally asked, his voice barely audible. I looked at my son and thought about all the years I had poured into Cole and partners, while assuming the people around me would simply remain intact without tending. Ethan had not become this person in a vacuum. I had left space and Diana Marsh had filled it. That was not an excuse, but it was a truth I owed him. We work on it, I said. Starting now. That's all I can give you tonight, and it's enough. He pressed his lips together hard, the exact expression he had made as a boy, trying not to cry in front of his father, and nodded once. In the corner, Sophie slept on, breathing softly. The house was quiet for the first time all evening. The courtroom on the 9th floor of the Bob Casey United States Courthouse on Rusk Street smelled like old paper and recycled air, the kind of place that has absorbed decades of broken promises and hard truths, and doesn't apologize for either one. It was the second week of December, 8 weeks after Diana walked out of my house in handcuffs. 8 weeks of attorneys' depositions and conversations with Ethan that left both of us wrung out and raw, slowly finding the thread that connected us again. I'd sat through 5 preliminary hearings, but today was different. Today, Walter Price was taking the stand. I was in the gallery, 3rd row, Frank on my left and Sophie on my right. Sophie sat with her hands folded back straight, working hard to appear older than 16. She'd earned the right to be here. She was the one who started all of this, who carried the fear alone for 3 days without cracking. Diana sat at the defense table, in a charcoal blazer, composed and precise-looking, like a businesswoman at a board meeting. But I was watching her hands. Her right thumb worked against her index finger in a slow, repetitive motion, a tell I'd never seen before. Small, constant, impossible to hide. She was afraid. Walter walked in at 11:15, gray suit and dignity intact, leaning slightly on a cane he hadn't needed 2 months ago. The stress had taken something from him physically. But when he settled into the witness chair, his eyes were clear and unflinching. Mr. Price, how long were you employed at the Cole residence? 25 years, Walter said steadily. I started in June of 2000, when Mr. Cole's wife, Margaret, was still alive. Did you observe any unusual behavior from the defendant? Walter's jaw set. Yes, ma'am, I did. He described hearing Diana through the partially open study door phone pressed to her ear, her voice certain and cold. After tonight, this house only needs one master. He wrote it down word for word that same evening. The next morning, when Diana brought the Macallan bottle into the kitchen and stepped away for a phone call, Walter had 90 seconds. He poured a small amount into a sealed glass and kept it. Why? Patricia Hollins asked. Walter's eyes found mine across the courtroom, just for a moment, warm and full of 25 years. Because I promised someone I'd look after this family, he said. And I keep my promises. My throat closed entirely. Sophie's hand tightened around mine and I held on hard. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination with polished confidence, certain he could dismantle a 71-year-old housekeeper. He was wrong. You took it upon yourself to collect evidence without legal authority. I took it upon myself to protect an elderly man from being poisoned in his own home. Walter said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone with nothing left to prove. I would make the same decision again tomorrow. The condescension evaporated. Stratton sat back down. When Patricia Hollins displayed the laboratory analysis on the courtroom screen, the sedative compound highlighted in yellow, Diana finally broke. Not in tears, not in outbursts. Her thumb stopped moving. Her spine curved forward just slightly. The color drained from her face in a way no amount of composure could disguise. Sophie leaned close and whispered, she just realized she lost. Yeah, I said, my voice rough. She did. 2 rows ahead, Ethan had his face in both hands. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon, the 18th of December, with a light winter rain tapping against the courthouse windows. The same kind of rain that had been falling the evening I landed at George Bush Intercontinental and climbed into a stranger's car without knowing it would save my life. I noticed that detail. I suspect I always will. The jury had been out for 11 hours. 11 hours of bad vending machine coffee, of Sophie pretending to listen to music while her head snapped up every time a door opened, of Frank reading documents with the steadiness of a man built from granite. I just sat there and tried to remember how to breathe. When the bailiff returned, the room went tight. The foreperson stood with the verdict form, and in the 15 seconds before his first word, I became aware of my own heartbeat in a way I hadn't felt since I was 32, waiting on a doctor's call about Margaret's biopsy. On the count of conspiracy to commit elder financial fraud, guilty. Sophie's hand found my arm. On the count of abuse of a vulnerable adult, guilty. Frank exhaled one long, controlled breath beside me. On the count of interstate wire fraud, guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, guilty. 5 counts, all 5. Diana Cole. Diana Marsh stood at the defense table without moving, as each word landed spine rigid and unbending to the last. When her attorney touched her arm after the final count, she shrugged him off. Even now, she couldn't allow herself to appear breakable. I watched her be led out, and I felt not triumph, not the sharp satisfaction I'd imagined. What I felt was quieter and heavier than that. The particular exhaustion of a man who survived something designed to destroy him, and is only beginning to understand what the surviving cost. I found Ethan in the shuffle of people rising, gathering coats. He stood when he saw me coming, and we faced each other in the middle of that courtroom. "It's over," he said. His voice was hollow and 20 years older than it should have been. "The trial is," I said. He understood the distinction. His eyes filled and he didn't look away. He let me see all of it, the shame and the grief and the love that had lived underneath the worst mistakes of his life. I stepped forward and pulled my son into my arms. He held on the way he used to during thunderstorms. Sophie appeared at my elbow and wrapped both arms around us, her face buried in my jacket. A sound coming out of her that was half laugh and half sob, and entirely 16 years old. "Can we please," she managed, voice muffled against my sleeve, "get food that isn't vending machine coffee?" Ethan let out a half-strangled laugh and held her tighter. Across the room, Frank caught my eye and gave me the same single nod he'd given me on my porch 8 weeks ago. The kind that doesn't need words. I was 68 years old. I had buried a wife, built a company, and sat in a stranger's car on a rainy October evening while my world rearranged itself around me. And I had come home not to the house, but to the only thing that had ever truly been mine, to lose these people, imperfect and damaged, and entirely irreversibly mine. Whatever came next, we would face it the way we'd faced this, together, and with our eyes wide open. People ask me sometimes how I got through it. Honestly, I don't have a clean answer. What I have is this: somewhere between that rainy airport and that December courtroom, I stopped believing I was alone in it. I'm a man of faith, and I'll say it plainly, I believe God put Derek Shaw in that Uber queue for a reason. I don't think Walter found that business card by accident. I don't think Sophie had the courage she had by accident. Some things are bigger than coincidence, and I've lived long enough to know the difference. Here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. Family drama revenge doesn't announce itself at the front door. It moves in quietly, learns your habits, sits at your table, and waits. I trusted too easily. I asked too few questions about the people closest to the people I loved most. Don't be like me. Check in. Pay attention. The people who love you will never resent the questions, and the people who don't will reveal themselves the moment you start asking. My personal opinion. Loyalty is rarer than money, and it matters more. Walter Price proved that. Sophie proved that. These are family stories. Revenge cannot touch the ones built on genuine love rather than calculated gain. If you take nothing else from what I've shared, take that. This story is one of the family stories revenge tries to write for you. Don't let it. And if you're living through something that feels like family drama revenge right now, please talk to someone you trust before it goes too far. Because these family drama revenge situations always escalate faster than you expect. If any part of this story moved, you drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your words mean more than you know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. This community is built on real stories, real lessons, and real people looking out for each other. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the very end. One final note. Some of the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely for educational purposes. If that's not the content you're looking for, no hard feelings, step away and find what serves you best. But if you're staying, I promise to make it worth your time.